Hey folks, welcome to another Broken Meeple review, and yes, I'm going to experiment a bit more with the 28mm by doing it face forward now, because the problem with the slanted camera was that if you imagine that this lens has a depth of field, the idea being that this foreground should be in pretty good focus and the background should be a little bit more blurry. When you have it straight on, it's good because then the whole background is a bit blurry and then the foreground is in focus. But when you have it on a slant, you end up with like the left-hand side of the screen being in focus, the right-hand side of the screen being out of focus, and it just looked weird. I mean, I had to redo several videos as a result, and like I say, after the recent batch of them, I was like, yeah, you know what, let's go back to doing it forward. But I'm trying to experiment with different tripod positions, you know, how far is the camera away, whether it's a bit more zoomed in. I mean, this is a bit more closer to me than it used to be, you know, I'm just trying to experiment. So eventually I'll get one that I like, but, well, we'll just have to see. Anyway, enough of that. Today I'm looking at AEG's new sleeper game, I guess. I mean, I never really knew a lot about this one. It just sort of appeared, and that was about it. This is Atelier. I have no idea if that's how you pronounce it. Atelier, the Painter's Studio. I'm just going to pronounce it like that. If I'm wrong, oh well.
We have to wait for Vegeta and Trunks to come out of the hypertonic lion tamer.
That one was on purpose.
This is kind of trying to jump into that crowd of Splendor and Century Spice Road. Effectively, it's a 30 to 45 minute game. You are all artists trying to, create these masterpieces and whatnot. And it plays very much like those games I kind of just mentioned, where you are collecting the different paints of whatever color, yellow, blue, red, green, etc. And you're trying to spend those paints to collect the cards, which represent different paintings. The paintings give you some special bonus or power for the rest of the game. There were victory points, and effectively you continue on in that fashion until someone's got 3 masterpieces, triggers the end, and then you see who's got the most points.
Of course!
As a result of the paintings, as well as some patron cards, which are like endgame scoring. The difference here, though, is that this one tries to introduce a little bit more interaction. With Splendor and Century Spice Road and a couple of the others, you can sort of argue that they're very much multiplayer solitaire games, with the exception of well, I better make sure he doesn't take that before me. You've got that element of interaction, but this one likes to put a little bit more in there. Closer to a game that I remember called Waggle Dance, where you had the bees on the nectar and you had to, area majority told you what nectar you got. Well, in this one, it's a similar thing. The paint are all laid out in piles, and you have student meeples that you put out onto those piles. And the idea is that when on your turn, you are rolling dice to do your actions. 4 dice, multitude of actions, placing students, moving students, collecting paint, etc. And with one of those actions, you collect paint based on the majorities that you have on the paint piles. So if I've got the majority on the blue and the red, but not on the other two, then I will collect a blue and a red paint. And if you have multiple majorities, then great, collect multiple paints. But of course, hopefully the other players are stopping you from doing that. And you can collect paints by, some other means as well, like some of the special abilities will get you paint, and rolling a 6 will just allow you to take a paint. But essentially, it's a bit like the Splendor type game. Collect the paints, pay them, get the card, carry on until the game ends. Except this time you're not getting to a specified victory point level, you're getting to a specified number of masterpieces and then totaling up the points. So the game itself, very simple. Roll some dice, do 1 or more actions depending on how many dice you want to use. Next player's turn, carry on, everybody's used up all their dice. Move the start player along, rinse, repeat, keep going and going and going with round after round after round until eventually somebody triggers the end game. Now, of course, you're thinking, well, we'll get onto this later. Let's first of all talk about component quality in the artwork. The artwork is pretty decent. All the cards have got, replicas or, actual photographs, I'm not entirely sure, of famous paintings with flavor text at the bottom. So if you're an art buff, you're probably going to get something out of this just by reading that flavor text. But all the cards look very nice, the paintings look great, the components themselves, you have got proper, like man-sized meeples, you've got the little cylinders for the paint piles that look pretty good, it's like you're just getting a little pot of paint effectively. And, you've got this artist eel board, I'm trying to see if I can get one out and show you, but it's a... There you go. You get this whole board in front of you, which is a little bit big for what it needs to be. I mean, it's great that it tells you what you can do with these special inspiration tokens, which are kind of like a side thing you can collect, as well as what the actions are. But all this is basically a storage for your dice and your various paints. But it fits the theme pretty well. not that there's a huge amount of theme in this game. I mean, just like Splendor didn't really make you feel like a guy who collected jewels, you know, a gem dealer, this one doesn't exactly make you feel like a painter. You're just collecting something in order to pay for something else. Now, it's, like I say, looks nice and is well produced. Box is probably a bit too big for what it needs to be though, and a lot of the reason the box is even this big is because of those boards I just showed you. If the boards were a little bit smaller, the box could be smaller, but even then I think you could probably make this box a little bit smaller, but it's the standard size box, it's kind of what they're going with. But it's certainly not quite as portable as, say, well, of course, Splendor, Century Spice Road, Majesty for the Realm, you know, all of those are much more portable than this one is. But it's not exactly too big a deal. Now, where this one is, like I say, trying to fit in, is it wants to fit within that Splendor crowd, because 30 to 45 minutes, gateway level rules. I mean, the rules in this are dirt simple. It's like a tiny little, it's like a little fold out paper thing. You read the front, read the back, done, you're good. And I can explain this in less than 5 minutes. It is very easy to get into and very easy to teach. So, okay, so, you know, tick. It's managed to fit alongside them in that respect. And I know I'm comparing a lot to the Century and Splendor stuff, but this is kind of where this game is sitting, therefore it has to try and measure up to the reigning champions in this field. Now, on top of the easy rules, it's not a, you know, you've got some decisions to make with what you're going to do with the various dice. And obviously you're looking at those paint piles thinking, right, well, he's got a lot over there. If I get one more dude on here with that die and then I use my collect paint, I can get a green paint as well as the blue and red. Great. You know, you're making little decisions like that, but they're not exactly, you know, overbearing. Although there is a slight hindrance with that. The rule, and it's kind of a bit like what the Carcassonne issue is. You roll the dice at the start of your turn. I can see why they've done this, because if you were to roll at the end of your turn, then other players might be sort of basing their moves based on whether they can see your dice are going to mess them over or play students out or whatever. However, I do think this game would have been a little bit improved had they done that. The rule stipulates you roll at the start of your turn, which creates a slight problem when it comes to downtime. There's not tons of downtime in this, but with a game like this in this sort of field, the turns have to be lightning fast. You know, you've got to be go, go, go. And this one can sort of, almost like a dodgy engine in your car, it can sort of it can stop and start quite often because you're going to get those people, and like I say, AP players, you know, it's the player, not the game, but it can introduce a little bit of analysis paralysis because you roll those 4 dice and then you start thinking about your turn, and you might do 3 or 4 actions. You might use up all your dice in one go, and that takes some time to do with some people. So you could be sitting there waiting, especially in a 4-player game, a bit too long for my liking, for for the thing to get back round to you, when you don't even know what you're going to do on your turn because you haven't rolled your dice yet. You've got plans, you know, it's like, right, I need to get a student there and a student there and collect paint. Great. No, I didn't roll that. Okay, now what do I do? Exactly, it causes that so often. I mean, the last game I played of this, I played at my Southampton group, and well, violent thoughts were in my head as one of the players who I know is quite AP prone was just like taking his sweet time, just trying to decide what to do with 2 or 3 dice, and I'm just like,
well, we're waiting.
This game can drag on a bit, particularly with the 4-player count. With 4 players, I mean, it says 30 to 45 minutes. You can go on past an hour with this game with 4 players. I'm not joking. You get the slow player, it can happen. You know, you have to paint 3 masterpieces before the game ends. Well, what if people don't paint the masterpieces that quick? You know, and you have the slow player as well. The game can drag. It can be played in as low as 30 minutes. I mean, you get 2 or 3 players who are pretty quick with this game, you'll do it. It'll be fine. However, the problem with having less players is that you don't have as much competition for the paint piles, because you've got majorities in 2 and 3 player, but tied majorities in 4 player. But with 4 of you going around, there's a lot more competition for those piles, and 4 players is a bit more entertaining for that regard. You play this with 2 though, and it's just like, well, I'm over there, you're over there, you're over there. Oh, well, we're getting a couple of paints each, and then I might just come and scuff you there. I mean, it's super, super fast, and it's not that the 2-player game is bad, but it doesn't quite feel as like in your face and interactive as the 4-player one does. But then of course, 4-player means more time and it starts to outstay its welcome a bit. You know, the last game I have to remember, I'm thinking like, oh yeah, we'll be done in about 30-45 minutes, is what the game says. Hour 15 minutes later, and I'm like, I am keeping those guys waiting, this is not good. So it does overstep itself. But in terms of everything else, it's a simple game, and it certainly looks the part and is easy for anybody to learn. It's gateway level. You know, learn what to do with 5 different actions you can do with dice, and the inspiration tokens are just an alternative thing you can collect on your turn, which you can spend to do one of 3 different things. Pretty straightforward. The paint abilities themselves can be a little bit ambiguous at times. The rulebook doesn't go into a lot of detail to explain. In fact, I'm not even sure the rulebook goes into any detail, actually, to explain what the various abilities do. You kind of have to just roll with it. And most of them are self-explanatory, but there are 1 or 2 where you're thinking, okay, I think it means that, we'll go with it. And I think I had to look up one up on BGG at one point. It didn't quite gel. I mean, the rule book is like a titty bit of paper. Could they have not just like added a couple of pages and just put detailed like explanations of what each of the card does? You know, that probably would have been better. In terms of tactics and strategy, there's not a great deal of variance, really. It's more a tactical game. Your patron may say, collect all the cards with this particular symbol. But that's kind of all you're doing, and so could somebody else, and so could somebody else, but another person might be collect a bunch of inspiration tokens. It's not that there's a lot of diverging paths, really. It's more a case of which cards are you going to pick, what paints are you going for at the time when you can see what all the like paint piles look like in terms of students, and of course, what abilities can you trigger with the things. I mean, are you going to gun for a few cards that are worth a ton of points, or are you going to try and speed the game and rush it with a bunch of little low cards? Well, you can kind of do that in Splendor and Century Spice Road as well. So, all in all, the game is fun. I do like it, but I just don't think it quite measures up to the stiff competition that you've got. I would play Splendor over this in a heartbeat. I would probably play possibly Century New Road over this, I think, as well. I'd probably play this over Century Spice Road, the original one, but and I'd definitely play Majesty of the Road over this one. So it sits nicely in that category of the easy sort of filler length games. But you have to bear in mind the problem with rolling the dice at the start of your turn. But to be honest, I think you could house rule rolling the dice at the end of your turn, and I don't think the game would break. I think it would probably be a decent fix. I'm curious to see what you guys might think of that one. Has any of you actually tried that with this game? I'd be interested to know. But, it's kind of one that sits in the category. It's there with the Splendors, with the Century Spice Road games, but it just doesn't... You would not replace either of those games with this one, in my opinion. You would probably own it alongside it. Like, you don't own Splendor and Century, where you could get this instead. Maybe you want a bit more of that in-your-face interaction. But otherwise, it's kind of... It's good, but not great. And for all that, I'd probably give it... Four players, I must admit, does drag on a bit too long for my liking. I think I'm going to give it a 6 overall. It's decent. It's a decent game. And I think, if you want that bit of interaction in a gateway level game, then pick it up. It looks the part. Probably a bit expensive for what it is, though, because of the big boards and stuff like that, though. And obviously it's a bigger box and not quite as portable as the other games. But it's still decent, and I think, you should probably just give it a look. Maybe try before you buy and see what it's like. A game cafe could easily host this without too much trouble. But I just think that it's trying very hard to insert itself into a category of games that's already pretty dominated by some heavy hitters. And unfortunately, it's just not pulling its weight. But, not to say it's a bad game. It's still decent, just not quite there. So that's Atelier's The Painter Studio by AEG. If you like what you see, please subscribe to the channel, click the button and let me know your thoughts. But until then, regardless of whether you're painting a fantastic masterpiece or you're painting one of those weird square abstract things that I really just don't get, it's still only a game. Take care, and I'll see you on the next review.